Welcome to the Personal Brand Era podcast. I'm your host, Ella Ray, and I'm excited to talk to Judith May today. She's a trauma coach, a psychologist, and mom, and she helps you overcome the limiting beliefs that hold you back in life and heal from trauma in relationships, marriage, parenting, business, and health. I am very curious, Judith, what inspired you to go into psychology specifically and then trauma coaching, which is a very specific little niche inside of life coaching?
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to speak with you. The reason that I got into psychology was because I was a yoga teacher. And people were coming in with all their injuries and all their personal situations, life situations. Maybe they were going through breast cancer, or people were passing away and dying, and they wanted to come in and cry in your arms. And I just was like, I'm not qualified for this, and that was like way back. I started doing yoga in 2004, and I got qualified as a Bikram yoga teacher in 2010. And I had seen like a progression of like lots of people over that time span, both my personal practice and my teaching. And so it was just to make me a better yoga teacher. Yeah, that's the truth.
And that is beautiful, because when as soon as you expand your knowledge or your horizon, your clients benefit so much from it. And what type of clients are you working with typically?
I have worked with so many various clients, from men who are, businessmen who emigrate and they find themselves in these big, powerful jobs, and they're dealing with imposter syndrome. And they're traveling all over Europe, or they're traveling to America, and they come back and to themselves, and they're like, I don't know what's holding me back. I need to figure out what's happening in my life. And a lot of times, they've never even pinpointed that it would have been a mother trauma wound, or their mother or father passed away, or they came from a massive big family, and they might have been fantastic sports athletes, but their parents never went to go see them play, or just said, yeah, go on ahead. And so they were lacking that confidence, and they might have been really well educated. Some of them were, technical engineers, or whatever they were, really profoundly intelligent men that were working for, computer software or NASA or whatever it was, and they had various traumas, and it genuinely affects us all. It's not just the weepy woman syndrome, it's really intelligent men across the board, either in high-powered executive jobs or executive women who find themselves having had these fantastic careers, but they're just not able to accelerate to the next level in their career. And something's holding them back, and they don't know what it is, why they're not getting promoted, why they feel incompetent, or they have imposter syndrome, like I said. And so, going to have a proper analysis of your life and your life cycles. So your 20s, your 30s, your 40s, your 50s, and then we take a look at what happened perhaps as a child. Maybe they had incidents that occurred, they broke their leg, or they had surgery that they never dealt with correctly, or they were, like I said, came from very big families years ago, and they just, not that they're not confident, that they just feel like they can't get to the next level. And so it's very vast how trauma affects us on different levels. Sometimes we carry grief and we don't even realize that we've been carrying it.
What I hear oftentimes when I move through social media and talk to other people, My impression is that the word trauma is being used like an everyday thing that they don't even know the pure definition of the word. And since you are also a psychologist, I would like to know, are people actually using the word properly when they are referring to something that has happened in their lives as trauma? And what is the real definition of it to actually help people to recognize it properly? Because when you mislabel something that has happened to you, you make yourself a victim, and then
Yeah.
you move into a space where you don't belong, right? And you kind of start self-pitying yourself, where there's no need to have pity for yourself, right? Because there's an
Right.
easy way out. So let's talk about what trauma means, how to recognize trauma properly from a perspective of psychology.
Okay, so with the sports athletes that I coach, let's say I take as an example, sometimes they'll come to me and they'll say, you know, whatever their game is, swimming, running, whatever it is, and they're fantastic at their niche, football, soccer, Irish Gaelic football, rugby, whatever. And for some reason, they're having trouble either getting to the home run or completing their task or getting higher contracts for money. They're not valued as much as other players. And I look at them and I evaluate them and I say, tell me what happened when you were a kid. And they're like, nothing happened. I had a great childhood. I was fine. And I'm like, okay, there has to have been something that occurred in your life. So what is trauma? Trauma can be, like I said before, the fact that your parents were focused on another child in the family. Perhaps your mom or dad were so busy with their own careers that they didn't make time for you as a child, which is a big one. And your nanny came to the games to pick you up, collect you, drop you off, or whatever, which is very common. Had a nanny myself, so it's various instances where there might have been nothing major of a catastrophe that happened, like an accident didn't happen to them, but it would have been something that they just couldn't pinpoint. So it could have been that they were bullied in school. It might have been that their father was very authoritarian. It might have been that their father was very strict with them. Or they may have seen another child in the family bullied or picked on, that they weren't up to par, and so they felt this inferiority complex. You could have been the best athlete and still not felt that you were never good enough if you were not congratulated when you did win, if you were put down, if the emphasis was on you can do better, instead of saying you did a great job. And I'm talking about 20, 40 years ago for people. Now it's all like, whoa, way to go. But there's a lot of people that are carrying around a lot of traumas from 50, 40, 30, 20 years ago. And so they're the people that I focus on. Now it's, all, hey, everybody's got a coach on the sidelines that loves them. But years ago it was very strict. And so it was a very different upbringing. It might have been in that they grew up in a religious household. It might have been that they grew up in a segregated household where their parents divorced because they were biracial, which is a big thing that people don't actually discuss. And yeah, it can be, again, this inferiority complex that people just can't put their finger on why they're not accelerating in the corporate world.
So from what I understand is, then trauma always appears or occurs when the integrity of the child is not being respected by whoever. It can be the parents, the siblings, the teachers, coaches, even friends, right? Whenever there occurs kind of like a hurt or a wound, right? Can we call it a wound within the integrity or within the identity of that child?
Yeah. And it could be that the child was not listened to. So if a child's bringing you in their homework and you're studying you're in your office at home, or that the child was unheard or not given attention, when a child comes to you and they have a rock in their hands or a flower that they picked from the garden, and the parents say, "Ugh," they're dismissive of them. "I'm busy, go away. I haven't got time for this." That indicates to a child that they're not important. And we only have a short span with our children to let them know how loved they are. Now, you can put them to bed every night, give them a kiss, tell them that they love them. But if you don't give them the one-to-one attention of, let's go into the garden, let's explore. When the kid comes in and says, "I want to play cards with you, I want to play Uno with you, I want to play swords with you," whatever it is, or any type of game, and the parent ushers them away, it sends the message to the brain and creates an engram in the child's brain that they're not lovable, they're not good enough, they're not important, and it sends a signal later in life to their mind where they're held back by the inferiority complex.
Can you give us some insights on how trauma affects our perception of ourselves in more detail, and how do you guide individuals towards developing a more positive and empowering self-image? Maybe with the same example that you used before, or maybe for women, is it different for women how you coach men and how you coach women?
Yeah, definitely different for men and women. So years ago, women were raised to, when they fell down, we would pander to them, quick, pick them up, mollycoddle them, make sure that they're kissed and that they're okay. And there's a TED talk on this about how we raise boys and girls differently. And we need to ascertain the difference here is that boys are not given love and attention the way we give girls love and attention. But what happens with the girls is, because we mollycoddle them and give them over attention, they're held back in life by a fear of taking risks. So they're not as big risk takers with their career, their family, their friends, they're traveling, they're exploring of who they are as individuals. They tend to stay in the same careers and the same profession for more than 20 years at a time. They don't really move around a lot. Nowadays, kids, young 20-year-olds, they'll try anything. But years ago, it was different. We were told, you're going to be an accountant, you're going to be a lawyer, you're going to be a nurse, you're going to be a doctor, and that was it. Whether they liked it or not, this was the chosen career path that was for them. And for men, a lot, they have insecurities. We all have insecurities, in life, but men tend to hide them. Men tend to laugh it off and pretend that everything's fine. And underneath, they're just that insecure little boy sometimes still.
Yeah, I can so much see that in men that I've met and raising kids myself, both son and daughter. The differences in how I started raising them, even though before I had kids, I had the goal, nope, I will raise them equally, right? There will be no difference, right? But when you actually start looking into the genetic predisposition of actually boys and girls, you cannot do much about how boys will be more prone to doing certain things, more dangerous things, more things that have increase their adrenaline and all that stuff. They love that, right? They need to move around a lot, and girls are a bit different. At least that's my experience with my two kids. And so when we when we neglect that, the nature of men and women, so to speak, we will do them a big disservice. And I think that's where most of the trauma can come from in the time of the childhood. Their parents actually don't try to cater and service to the nature of those two different genders, boy and girl.
Yeah. So girls were raised years ago in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to find a husband, have children, and that was it. The career part really was for those who had gone to college. And you'll see on college applications, are you a first-time family applicant for this college? Which is a big thing, because where are they getting their guidance from? Who's advising them? Which colleges that they get into was a big thing in the States, you know, that they were buying their way into certain colleges because they weren't academic enough. Being academic is not the be all and end all. Sometimes they were going on scholarships for sports activities, and that's great. But there was a big difference between those who were from the families who had gone in previous older generations to college, who followed in their parents' footsteps, but might not have got the choice to choose what they wanted to do in life. For women, they were just more ushered into the family life, you know.
Do you think?
And then they finished their families, and the kids are growing up, they're empty nesters, and they don't know what to do.
And now
and then they're divorced.
Yeah, and now like everything seems to change when it comes to the role of men and women, right? How do you feel and see this progression and this change in what women actually now want, which is basically not have any type of relationship, not have any kids, just be very career focused, while men, I feel like men are really lost nowadays. What is your impression about that in terms of the trauma that you see having older generations and the generations that we have now? Is there a difference between the types of trauma that they have?
Yeah, so people tend to think like, well, nothing ever happened to me, so I'm fine. But then they have to look at their relationships that they've had, staggered relationships, you know, all these 3 marriages in the States, 4 marriages, 5 marriages. And you have to wonder, when I started analyzing what happens, why people, the rate of divorce it was the generational advice that they had been given by not by their parents, by their grandparents sometimes, you know. So the older generation were the war babies, let's say, who had said, just get a job, just be happy, just go to work, just, you know. And it was always the just do this, just do this, just do this. So if they were the veterans, let's say, they came home with a lot of mental war wounds, so their mental health was affected, and they might have been very stern, very strict. They might have had PTSD and not realize that they were passing on their little PTSD issues onto their children, or the grandparents were passing them on, saying, you got to eat all your food. You don't know where your next food is coming from. It could be on rations, which is a big thing in Europe. So it had this thing in Ingram in the brain of saying there's never enough. And that's simply not true in today's modern society. There's more than enough. The world is in abundance. But if you were told this as a child, it kind of stuck in your brain. So you're constantly on the hamster wheel of believing in your mind that being wealthy or being rich, if you were not from a wealthy or rich home, was unattainable. And today, with the internet and sales on the internet, everybody can have an online business if that's what they so choose, you know. So the world is shifting, but the generations did influence our way of thinking, whether we realized it or not.
That is so true. I remember what my mom used to tell me. She's married, still married, but at one point when I was, I don't know, a teen, probably started out studying in university, I remember her telling me that never make yourself dependent on a man financially.
Yeah.
And I am not blaming her for any of the outcomes in my life, but maybe, just maybe, that influenced me in a way that as soon as there was a difficulty in a relationship, I tended, or when I felt any type of pressure or dependency on a man, maybe I tended to move away quickly from that, because my mom told me that was a warning, right? That I should not do that, not being dependent on someone, right? Especially
Yeah.
financially. And now, being a single mom, I see things very much differently, right? When you go through that type of life, like you really start to understand what dependency really means. And that being
And
dependent,
codependency.
being dependent on someone is not a bad thing. Maybe it was a bad
Mhm.
thing for her because
Yeah.
she couldn't really start working, and that was her particular and very personal story. That is not a copy of my story. My story is very different from hers, right?
Yeah.
So we need to be very careful who we take advice from, because everyone's story is so different, and we need to make decisions based on what we want for our lives. And before we make decisions, actually get different types of advices from different types of people, and not just trusting blindly whoever tells us whatever to do with our lives.
Yeah, and knowing self-worth also. A lot of people, their mothers might not, they just because they married and were in a family doesn't mean that their mothers had a sense of self-worth, which they passed on to their children. So when you're talking about money earlier, some people were not allowed to have money, even though they came from very affluent families. They might not have learned how to proportion money or how they associate money because they never had to work for it. And so you could have come from a very well-to-do family, very well off, and then when you went to school, but you still had no financial wisdom. This goes for men and women, because it wasn't taught in schools years ago. You weren't taught how to value yourself. And so people charge less than what they're worth. They believe that they're worth less. Not saying that they're worthless, but that they're worth less than what they charge for their services or their goods or whatever it is that they're buying.
That is a big topic that comes up so much, not only in client work, but also in the interviews that I do on a weekly basis. We talk so much about self-worth, self-awareness, and how much to charge, since most of my listeners for this podcast are female coaches who try to build their businesses and get clients on a regular basis. And I see that a lot. A lot of women especially tend to have this feeling of worthlessness, where they feel I cannot charge that much, while men don't have that type of problem. Like most of them, at least, is from what I
Yeah,
see, like they are very bold, right? They can
yeah,
easily charge 10K for a blip of service, right? While the woman somehow thinks she has to produce and provide 10x of that value to be worthy of this 10K. And I see a very interesting parallel in relationships as well. Like whatever the man gets away with doing the bare minimum, and he's celebrated for it, right? He goes to the store with his daughter, right? A daddy, let's say, right? And he's celebrated for it. Oh, what a great daddy. He goes shopping with
yeah.
her
We're
daughter,
going to the
with his daughter.
store.
Yes, and when the mom goes shopping, that's a given. That's like below
Because that's
bare
her job.
minimum, right? Yes, it's her job. So we tend to not see all the work. We as women, we tend to not see all the work that we actually do, and we tend to accept the bare minimum from men oftentimes. And when we go out in business, we do the same thing. We
Yeah.
tend to overvalue what men bring to the market and undervalue what we have to offer to the market. And so we undercharge, just like it's a disease, I would say.
Yeah, the inequality in equal pay is across the globe. and we think that women who are undervalued for their services when they're doing exactly the same job as men. And yeah, it's a really big issue that is in the limelight a lot of the time. You'll see it a lot in politics, you'll see it a lot in TV presenters, news presenters, you'll see it a lot in sports athletes, that the women in comparison don't get the big four contracts: shoes, cars, paid advertising, all of the massive the sneaker ads, the drinks ads, Pepsi, Coke, Coca-Cola, you name it, the Budweiser ads. Who's promoting them? What are they getting? And how much are they getting paid for the Super Bowl ads,
That also reminds me on about 4 years ago when I started business online, I tended to have the misconception that male coaches were better than female coaches. I really caught myself thinking that one day, because I was always pursuing male coaches somehow, subconsciously, right? And at some point I realized that, and I thought to myself, like, that can't be true. And one of the reasons why I started the podcast, interviewing female coaches, to actually reverse my own beliefs and also, of course, cater to the world and show the world that that misconception is totally untrue. And we need to give space and a stage to women who actually have a voice and have something to say, a story to tell, a mission that they're on, right? And a vision for their own businesses, where they want to go and what they want to change in this world and how they are going to do that.
Yeah, definitely. And it wasn't that they weren't valuing women. It was that there were not enough women in the coaching arena.
Yeah. That is also very true. Like women just
and
in general, women in business.
You have to learn.
Yeah. Women in business just in general, there were not so many just very recently. Like women started to, like 50, 60 years ago, women started to really be in the business space, really start educating themselves, going to universities and all that stuff. That's, I would say, very, very fresh development. If you look at the bigger span of the development of the human race in general, right? And
yeah.
Do you see a lot of misconceptions when it comes to trauma in general?
People believe trauma is you get in a car accident and you have a slip and fall accident, and that's what trauma is, a broken leg or a broken arm. But trauma is a psychological condition, and it can be a physiological condition, which is the mind and the body are affected. So you could witness a murder on the street, and just because you see it across the street doesn't mean that it's not psychologically impacted your mind. It could be that, after that day, you are fearful, you have anxiety, you start to live in a state of impending doom. Could that happen to you or your family? And so you're not as precocious in your life. You're not as readily to say, hey, let's go on vacation, because that fear that's in the back of your subconscious mind plays over the what if game and holds you back from living your best life, I'd say.
Are there more misconceptions around trauma besides that?
Sure. Trauma is associated with, like I said, the war, refugees, starvation, natural disasters in the world, hurricanes, flooding. It could be a myriad of mental health issues that are the unspoken situations that a lot of people have dealt with the clergy abuse in life, and when it affects one person in the family, when one person is affected, it actually affects the entire family. So you could have had a daughter who went off and was in a hurricane or a flood or the tsunami over in Thailand, she comes home and says, wow, I survived that. But she passes on her anxieties to her children unconsciously. That's trauma. That's unconscious awareness trauma. And when we become more trauma informed and trauma sensitive to the amount of shootings that are in the world, to the amount of displacement of refugees in the world currently, when we had the pandemic and we saw a lot of the Antifa people breaking down buildings, glass buildings, regular shop buildings, people were put out of business. The pandemic really affected so many people psychologically. It was a turning point in the world to take a step back and self-evaluate. And, a lot of people had mental breakdowns over the pandemic because they weren't able to actually emotionally and psychologically cope with the situation that occurred to everybody, with the amount of death and loss and grief that happened.
So
that's trauma.
What are the immediate effects that any type of trauma can have on a human being? Let's take children and let's take say adults as a comparison. Is there a difference in the effects that it can have? And I know trauma is like a spectrum. There can be mild trauma and there can be very would you call that, very high
Emotional
level
effect.
of trauma, right? So I know there's a spectrum, but is there a difference between the effects of what it does with a child and what it does with an adult?
It depends on their support network. So you can have a child who breaks their leg when they're little, and they're given lots of love and attention and they're rehabilitated and they never think about it again. Or you could have the adult who fell off a horse, a child who fell off a horse while they were horse riding and who carries this particular trauma because they weren't given that much attention. Trauma in children is much different depending on, let's say, if they grew up in social housing. In America, they have a lot of displaced children, and not that they're just children in care. And so these children are walking around with concealed emotional wounds, the foster care children, the abandoned children, the children of addicts. Addiction is a big one because it affects the children. The children see their parents who they love and adore, no matter what. A child can be beat horrendously and still love their parents. When they grow up in those addiction households, that's often the case, that they're neglected and that they don't get fed or loved or attention, or that they're sent to school sometimes hungry. And in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, you name it, that's still happening today. Homelessness, underprivileged, it's a broad range. You can come from nothing and make yourself into something, absolutely, but it doesn't mean that you're not carrying those traumas with you, and it will affect you in your adulthood because you will choose partners who are not good for you. Yeah, childhood neglect is a very serious. You can grow up in a wonderful family and you might have been the child who just wasn't given the attention. You could grow up in a family of 6. You could grow up in a family of 2. And you might have been the one who the younger sibling might not have been relished or loved as much as the older child. So it's always like the older child was like the superstar at sports and the younger kid was never the good enough kid. And this is an emotional trauma that people carry with them, deal with them. I've had women who come to me and tell me that they witnessed their brothers being admonished or beaten when they were younger. And the women were traumatized by this because they were losing at their football games or they weren't great enough at their sports. And so the fathers were really mad because the son was supposed to be the pride and joy,
So very true. So basically, when a child goes through emotional or mental trauma, and it's not catered correctly by the parents, and it's not dealt with correctly, it will carry on that trauma into their parenting style, right? Can you tell us more about what happens there and what someone can actually do to prevent that as a parent?
Yeah, so if you grew up in a house where there was a lot of shouting, domestic abuse, or just bickering and fighting, and or sometimes years ago it was men who would come home drunk and they would start the argument, or women, could be anything. And so these are little traumas that were witnessed by children. It might have been the domestic abuse where the children witnessed their mom being beat up and they tried to step in and they got a smack. And they might never have thought about this for 30 years. No, I had a great childhood. My childhood was brilliant, because it's in their subconscious mind. But when they come to me and they say, you know what, my kid does anything and I fly off the handle, and they recognize themselves that their parenting skills are a quick retaliation at the child for just being patience is learned, let's be honest, when you're a parent. So it's a quick retaliation. A child sticks their hand in the fire, you automatically slap the child's hand, but that's not teaching the child that that's not a good what to do. You have to say, dangerous burn, right? So it was that our parents didn't know how to parent. And so it just transfers down. And like I said, most people might not have realized that they witnessed their parents even drinking in their homes, and the effect that had on them. Sometimes it can make the child want to drink and copy the parents. Or if the child is witnessing an adult smoking, the child could want to smoke and copy the parents because they think that it's a good thing, they think it's cool. Or drug use, whatever it is. But psychologically, whatever we have seen or whatever we witnessed our parents doing, we imitate that unless we make a conscious choice to break those patterns and be consciously aware that we choose not to smack our kids. We choose not to take a count of 3, take a breath before entering the room where all the screaming's going on with the kids that are bashing each other or whatever it is. Before, you look at the big paint spill, you come home and the kids have got into something, or all the pots and pans, or the food is all over the place, just kids playing. But the initial reaction is, what have you done? And good parenting is a skill that is learned over time. The quick reaction to, I'm going to smack you, is something that we learned from our parents. So we have to be conscious to say, oh, okay, we can be better parents of ourselves, be kinder to our kids, not interrogate the kids, not antagonize the kids with, get up them stairs, I'm gonna, get you, you're gonna be sorry. Because this creates anxiety and fear in a child that they're not valued, they're not good enough, they're not loved. And it's an intimidation factor where they walk around frightened as adults to stand up for themselves. They're not able to mentally be able to know if somebody's bullying them in a workplace. You have a lot of adults that are really stern in the workplace, and they pick on their employees or they pick on their colleagues. because they were often bullied as child, or teachers bullying children. They were often the bullied child in school themselves.
And whenever a parent is doing that, taking on the strategies, let's say the parenting strategies of their parents, and they are not aware of the traumatic effects of it, they also achieve something that is quite scary for a child, which is they feel very lonely. And it makes them very lonely when you impose those traumatic experiences onto them. And if you don't quickly realize what you've done and you don't cater to them, you don't foster that connection and maybe even admit that you just made a mistake, right? If you don't seek the connection with the child, you actually achieve that they feel extremely lonely. And I think this carries on into their adulthood, and then they will make choices based on that feeling of being alone, being abandoned. I think this is an abandonment trauma by itself, right? That I see a lot of people are enormously struggling with.
Yeah, definitely. The mother wound is one of the biggest wounds that you could ever have. And it's a psychological issue with so many people, whether they were loved, overloved, mollycoddled, or whether they were given the attention. I think the mother wound is one of the bigger ones. You can come from a single family and be brought up by a single mom and have, you know, great self-esteem and go out and be very successful in your life. It depends. It's a chemical precarious balance in the brain that somebody either has the capacity to be resilient in life, depending on their circumstances of whether they were told or not. You're going to be okay. You can do this. Doesn't matter if you fall down 10 times, get back up. A sense of self-belonging, even with the children that have gone to numerous foster care homes or whatever, they could end up being fantastic in their lives, you know, and because they might just have that resilience. And then you have children who were brought up in, you know, very, very wealthy homes, and they have the isolation and the loneliness, and they've got everything. They've got all the toys, they've got all the money, they've got all the food, all the candy, all the Christmas presents up the walls, you know, at Christmas, but they didn't get the attention. And so this is a psychological wound where the children were dressed up and used as pawns, really, to make their parents look good in narcissistic parent-children relationships.
Yes, I see a quite big of a danger whenever you are attracted to wealthy things, big things, that the riches of life, you know, you tend to break the connection between the human beings that are part of your family, right? The isolation actually is bigger. Just from a physical standpoint of view, if you purchase a humongous villa, right, and your family lives in that villa, from the space itself, like, you are so separated, you are so isolated from each other, and that has a daily effect on the people. And I think there is a right balance of how much room does a person actually need, right? And sometimes I think that the bigger something is, the more wealthy it seems, the more it actually creates isolation between the people. And if you compare that to a smaller house, right, and people tend to be more together, right, it also creates conflict, right? The closer you are together, the more conflict there will be with the people, right? But the more you are isolated from other people, the more conflict you will have with yourself. That's my impression. And when you are actually
yes.
closer together with the family, you eat together on one table every meal, right? Then you actually foster that connection, and isolation cannot break you apart, so to speak, cannot break the family. So I think people, especially in the entrepreneurial world, they are so blindsided almost by all the riches that they can achieve. And I wish them all the best to do that, right? We all deserve to have a certain level of lifestyle and wealth so that we can actually fulfill our dreams and passions and all that good stuff. But at the same time, I see a lot of people being blindsided by it. And when it is too late, realize that they have been hunting those riches while the isolation has become so huge in their lives. They don't have friends, the family, they broke up with family. The relationship with kids is difficult, complicated because of their wish to achieve this big, wealthy thing, right? And that also causes all types of traumatic experiences for everyone involved.
Yeah. You could be a single child and say, oh my goodness, I was so isolated. I'm going to grow up, and then the adults grow up and they have 5 children because they want to feel that love and connection, you know. And there is no norm. It's so broad, it's so diverse. The world is so different, you know. There is no normal behaviors. That the psychology is the study of human behaviors, and it's so vast, it's so interesting, it's so diverse, and there are so many happy people in the world. But there are the other side, which is people that genuinely struggle with being, you know, they could have the great job, the great marriage, they could have all the happiest children, and still they feel unfulfilled, or they feel sexually deprived within their marriage, and they don't know why this is. They're just unsatisfied. They could have all the money to buy all the food, they could be in the best restaurants, and still they could feel lonely. Yeah, you're right.
Do you have maybe a personal story or a client story that moved you in a profound way?
I think all of my clients have been very unique. I've dealt with, you know, domestic abuse survivors, women who've gone through divorce and they're separating when they're in their 50s and they just need that bit of Dutch courage, so to say, you know. Some of my clients have been just, I've had so many. I don't believe that there's one. I can't just think off the top of my head that there's one unless I speak about myself. I think resilience is a big thing for a lot of people, and you either have tenacity, or a lot of people. I like the analogy of the lobster. You've heard of the lobster analogy, have you? Let me tell it to you.
Yeah.
So there's a Jewish rabbi, and he talks about when people are uncomfortable in life, we tend to run to the doctor. And the doctor isn't always the best person to go to. So he gives the analogy of a lobster. And the lobster, when they're small, when they're just little babies and they're only 1 pound, in order for them to grow, they have to shed off their shell and wriggle out and go find a rock and crawl underneath their rock. But they're terrified because they're exposed, and they have to go find somewhere, hide until they grow a new shell. And this is their life. They have to expand and grow and shed their skin and expand and grow. And it continues until they're sometimes 30-pound lobsters, right? We've often seen them. And the same is for life. But when people get uncomfortable, rather than expanding and growing, they run to the doctor because they say, I have a pain, I can't emotionally cope with this, I'm not able to support myself, this is psychologically too much for me, and so they go and get a pill. I'm not saying that depression isn't real. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm just saying medication in general is widely prescribed for a various array of different items. And sometimes it's because we've never learned to expose ourselves and be brave and to push past the fear, to push past the pain, to push past the grief, to push past the sorrow of loss of our first marriage, loss of our second marriage, whatever it is, and carrying it around with you. The loss of a child is so paramount in so many people's lives, and it is debilitating for so many people to have to live with this loss and trauma and whatever it is, a child in a car crash, and it's something that you never ever get over. But the doctors are so quick to prescribe the Valium, to prescribe the medication, opioids, you know, they're just so widely prescribed for veterans. And that's not the best course of avenue. We know that. We can see that from the opioid crisis. So there are so many reasons that when you evolve and you shed your skin and you learn to grow, we grow and we grow out of our shells, out of our skin, by being brave. So in times of adversity, as the wise Jewish rabbi said to me, he said, is times of great pain, but great growth. And so go and take the vacation that's the other side of the world, you know. A lot of times we're held back. Oh, I wouldn't go there because, you know, of X, Y, or Z could happen. And you're stopping yourself from living a happy life. Learning to shed your skin.
That is closely connected to time, I feel, because that's an observation I also made when I grew up in Asia, and then I came as a young girl to Germany, and that was like a cultural shock for me to see the different worlds. And what I noticed is exactly what you are describing. As soon as people had problems, they were running to the doctor, and the doctor was very quick to prescribe any type of pill that they had at hand. But it actually doesn't solve the problem. I recognized that very early on, and I was always wondering what's up with those people. Why don't they have the resilience? Why don't they have the strength? Why don't they have the patience? Why don't they say, why do they always say, I don't have the time? I mean, I understand that from the societal structure that people have built in Western countries especially, and of course now across the world, the way how we live and how we work, you have to go to kindergarten. It starts so early that you are pressured into certain things that you think you don't have time. So of course you will go ahead as a teen or as an adult, try to fix your big problems that are so heavy on your shoulders with a simple pill. You will try to save time. I think that's the major reason why, or one of the reasons why people are doing this, to save time, because they have to be at work tomorrow, right? And this is this short-sighted view on life. Why not solve the problem of actually being under pressure? If you feel so pressured to go to work every day, you don't enjoy it, you don't enjoy school, you don't enjoy work, you don't enjoy the people at work, why not solve that problem? Because then all your other health problems, trauma problems will be solved as well, because healing actually takes time. And I heard that as a mom so many times when I went to a doctor and when we had to be in kindergarten, in school, like, how much time are you given to heal? A day or 3 I can take off, right? And then I have to be at work again. Like, how? The body needs more time to heal. And especially when we're talking about trauma, right? The physical health actually can propel quite fast if you know how to heal yourself naturally. But when we are talking about trauma, there's no one, you have to put yourself in a psychiatric facility in order to have a pause, in order to have time. Take time to heal yourself. But if we are in the working space, so to speak. We are adults, we need to go to work. Nobody will tell you, it's okay, I understand you're dealing with XYZ trauma, take off a month and you are still being paid. Nobody will say that, even though we would need that, right? And I know some people might write in the comments now, where is all that money coming from that you are demanding, so to speak? I think we can find solutions if we actually put health on top, which is not the case right now. Health is not on top. Everything else is on top, but not health.
Yeah. Mental health. Yeah. It's an overall issue. Obviously, it's in the world. When I was in the States, my best friend died of ovarian cancer when she was 28. I was 26. And I remember my job saying to me, take time off if you need to go to the hospital and visit her. And I never forgot that kindness that I was shown to go be with my best friend at the hospital because she was dying. And it was so astounding to me that they were giving me time off for my friend. It was just, so it is different, I guess, in different countries. They have different ways, but emotional, mental health issues are often just the placebo effect. If you have a cough, I'll go to the doctor. I'll get a prescription for an antibiotic. But you don't need an antibiotic for a cough. It's not the answer. We know that. And even it was so widely prescribed that they had ads in the radio. You don't need to go to the doctor for an antibiotic for a cough, right? So it was the placebo effect of the doctor writes prescription and it's fine. But they didn't want to look at the underlying unconscious things that were there. Because it's hard. It's hard to self-analyze. I remember when I went to counseling college first, I didn't want to look at myself. I thought my life was great. I thought it was wonderful. I was able to cope. And then we started unraveling, the layers of your life, like an onion peel. It's slow, and it's not everybody can do it because most people love to escape the reality of life. They love to go out and party. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it. It's great to have a release. But drinking alcohol is one of the number one things that people do because they just don't want to have to deal with their circumstances. Most people just go, I'll just have a drink and I'll drown my sorrows, is a common terminology that is heard, right? But alcohol is actually depressant. Couple that with opioids, take cocaine, as an addiction. People just do it because they want. It's escapism. Ecstasy is escapism. It's fun, it's wonderful, but they're not looking at what the cause and effect is going to be 20 years from now. What about all the people that were doing cocaine for the last 70 years? And we're finding dementia is more in the spotlight now with people who are having brain aging at a younger time frame or timeline, which is a big thing.
I honestly never understood the alcohol society, if you will. Actually coming from Russia, where that is so, from Kazakhstan, but they are heavily influenced by Russians, obviously. The drinking is actually excessive, right, for Russians. They just love doing it. I believe they still love doing it. When I came to Germany, it was a little bit different. Yeah, exactly, right? So for Germans, it's a bit different. They do not drink vodka, for example. That's not their number one drink. But beer was always like every day, beer and wine, right? And I never understood that.
Like lunch and dinner.
And I never understood that. Again, short-sighted way to actually deal with your own problems. And
it's enough confidence as well for business people. You go and you have a beer with your lunch because it loosens people up, because people aren't as confident as they pretend to be.
Yeah, and it was quite difficult for me to actually be even around people, because I decided very early on because of what my mom again told me. She came from a very disturbing childhood where alcohol played a huge role for her dad, and it was a miserable childhood for her. And so whenever she told me about her childhood, I understood that this is not a choice that I want to make for myself. Also because I knew in the future I want to have children, I want to have a healthy body, because I want to provide the best that is possible. So very early on, I made that choice. And it was very hard to actually be with people, be around people, because especially in Germany then as a teen, right? Whenever there was a party, there was always alcohol. Like, and if I say, I have a water, please. Like, I was always the weird one. Like, are you an alcoholic? Why are you drinking water? You know?
Yeah.
Like, I was thinking, who's the alcoholic here? Right? It
Yeah,
was very, very hard. And so I completely isolated myself in the literal sense, that I thought, if people really enjoy that so much and I don't, I just have to break that. I cannot be around people who drown themselves instead of dealing with their problems. And of course, I have to also admit that I did that excessively and way too much, way too early. I was way too young to get into psychology, to start analyzing myself, analyzing all my problems I had. It was pure overthinking. I was way too young to get into it. But on the other hand, it helped me to stay away from alcohol, to stay away from smoking, to stay away from drugs and all the bad things that parents always tell you about not to do, you know? And so it actually helped me to be a bit wiser about these things and make better choices. While, of course, in other areas, I didn't make great choices. Like, there are always things and areas in life where you are great, you can excel, right? Because you understand that really well. And there are other areas of life where you make such huge mistakes, you think, oh my God, I must be stupid.
Yeah. It's everybody is different. That's just the way it is. You know, your upbringing really cements in your mind from the ages of 0 to 7 how your confidence levels are going to be, and then from 7 to 14 how your precociousness is going to be, how what type of career you're going to choose. Although you may choose many careers in your life, it's an engram again in your brain about what you're told, what professions are the good professions. You know, sports athletes, everybody wants to be a singer when they're younger, or you know, be a movie star on TV, and sometimes that's just a great dream, but it's not attainable for a lot of people. And the escapism that occurs with a lot of people who self-medicate, or they saw their parents having their parents living in the home who were, in America it's a big thing, where the teenagers were stealing their grandparents' medication and going off and getting high from it, and there was no reason for them to be doing this. They came from good homes, they just wanted to experiment and try. And of course then the experimentation turns into, let me buy the street drugs, you know, and see what else is out there. And it had a knock-on effect of where you could come from a wonderful loving home and you don't know why your child has turned to substance abuse.
And I see that you are dealing with a wide range of things that can happen to people, or the choices that they make in life. Like, we need to take responsibility after all, right? So the range is really very wide in what you are dealing with on a daily basis with your clients. And what is the most important thing that you would tell someone who might be thinking about getting help, because they are maybe feeling or thinking, I might have something that I need to work on?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and I'm so glad that you asked. I'll tell you why. Because years ago, mental health was something that was hushed up. It was that you went to the doctor and you said, I don't feel good, and they wrote you a prescription for Valium or painkillers to subdue your feelings and emotions. And now we know in the last 20 to even 10 years how much more valuable going and speaking to a psychiatrist or psychologist really is. What's happening with today's modern society, and we're not, and this is kind of like the unspoken modern conundrum that people are having, is women who are going with domestic abuse issues, let's say, or marital problems. They've got their house full of kids, they're working women. They just quite simply don't have the time. They get there, they got to sit there for an hour, they're exposing themselves, they're crying, they're upset, then they have to get back into their car, drive, could cause a crash or a car accident or whatever it is. It's not feasible to have all this driving around, to spend 1 hour somewhere, when we value our time so much today in society, right? So online telehealth and online coaching is becoming more popular for people, and online mental health services, because people can sit in the comfort of their own home and they can be as raw and as real as it is with a professional who's guiding them through. And it might not be that you have a mental health issue. It could be that you just don't know the direction that you want to go in life. Should I move country? Should I take this new job? Should I go with this new guy? Should I divorce my husband? Should I, have a new baby? I'm going through fertility issues, or, there's so many. IVF is such a big thing. Emotional baggage that we carry around from women even who've had miscarriages, or who might have had abortions in their teenage years and they never thought about it ever again, and because it just never came up in their minds. And then they come to me and they say, you know what, when I was 15, I did this and I never really dealt with it. And then I had a miscarriage and I never dealt with that. And now it's affecting my relationship with my children that I have now. I have attachment issues or parenting issues or loving issues with my children. And my husband's like, what the heck is wrong with you? And he doesn't understand those women's situations, women issues. And that's why when you touched on the topic earlier about male coaches, there are certain things that you can only relate to a woman with a woman, another woman.
I 100% agree to that. And I think someone has to
be vulnerable with a woman.
Yeah, it goes deeper, right? It's you can unravel things that you exactly know she will understand, right?
Yes, and it is really transforming and helping to heal so many individuals who are so wounded. It doesn't have to be a physical pain. It can be a heart wound. It can be a soul wound. It can be a childhood wound. It can be a parental wound. It could be an abandonment wound from a job that you were fired at when you're in your 20s and you felt, walked out of there and you said, I'll get a new job, but it might have hurt you. And it might be holding you back because you're always going to think, well, they fired me, I must not be good enough. And I've seen this when people got fired from, let's say, Home Depot. And I saw this young kid walking out, and went on his way out after he was let go, he literally destroyed the entire store. He dragged glass container, pasted sauce down and threw pots and plants. And he just had an adult tantrum as he was leaving the store. Now, it might have been his only source of income to pay his rent and to pay all that. But underneath that, he was a traumatized child. He was unable to know that, hey, if I get fired, I can get another job. I can do something else. It's not the only thing that I can do. There's always other avenues to pursue. But when you're not giving coping life skills as a child, either by your coach, your mentor, your guardian, or your parent, it affects us. And we don't know how to deal with everyday normal situations. And in our minds, they become so much bigger than they actually are. But when you get a life coach, they help you to put things in perspective. They help you to see, okay, let's look at this. Let's analyze this. What's actually happening? And so it just gives you better life coping skills.
So when someone decides to actually do that type of work, where can they find you?
I'm on Facebook. You can check me out at Judith May. My link is in my bio. I'm actually doing a lot of trauma training for psychologists because there was or professionals such as police or other psychologists, like I said. I do one-to-one training. I have kind of progressed past that a little bit, where I thought that I could reach a broader audience by doing these Zoom calls. And I've had some of the best mentors that are in the business, and I'm just starting off. There's a link in my Instagram page, and I'm on Psychology Today as well, or you can find me on LinkedIn.
And of course, I will leave all the links to my listeners in the description so they can easily find you and contact you. Thank you so much, Judith. It was amazing talking to you.
Thank you. I look forward to speaking with you again, actually. Thank you so much